The late afternoon sun bathed Bill Street in honeyed light as Bobby Davis's voice drifted over cracked pavement. An imperfect, heartfelt, "Can't Help Falling in Love" strummed on his battered guitar. Passers-by halted. Coins clinked into his open case. And for a moment, Memphis felt paused on a sigh. Then, from the crowd's edge, a figure in a dark hooded cloak stepped forward, silhouette sharp against the neon glow. He lifted a hand and asked simply, "May I try?" Silence snapped like a snapped string. Bobby, heart pounding, handed over the microphone. The stranger drew in a breath, and in the first trembling notes of "If I Can Dream," every whispered doubt and every jaded scoff fell away. Faces softened. A mother wiped her tears. A teenager let his phone lower, forgotten. Nobody moved, because in that single, impossible moment, the king of rock and roll had come home, unannounced, unseen, yet profoundly alive. And Bobby Davis knew he had witnessed something that would change everything. The summer heat clung to Memphis like a second skin, the late-day sun gilding brick facades and painting the narrow streets in gold. At the corner of Beale and Bill Street, where traffic slowed for the trolley and the smell of corn roasting on iron grills curled into open windows, Bobby Davis parked his battered Chevy and stepped onto the sidewalk. The engine's hum fell away, replaced by the chatter of tourists, the honk of impatient drivers, and the distant wail of a harmonica drifting from an open doorway. Bobby carried his guitar case like a talisman, worn leather scarred by travel, the gold-lettered nameplate long since dulled by sweat and strain. At 24, he was slender and still wore his service wound, a near-silent ear from Vietnam's final firefight. His left ear heard everything clearly. The right only faint whispers. Music was his guide through the blur of memory and grief, and he climbed onto a milk crate beside a rusted streetlight to set up his makeshift stage. He tuned the low E first, ear pressed against the wooden body. That chord brought back a boy in Tupelo, leaning over his mother's record player, mesmerized by a young man's voice that carried the future in every note. That voice, Elvis, had been his beacon in muddy trenches, a reminder that somewhere beyond the war, a song could still heal. When Bobby began to strum gentle chords of "Can't Help Falling in Love," his voice cut into the hum of the city. He sang not with perfection, but with fervor, each lyric a prayer for home, for hope. Passers-by slowed. A woman twisting a faded straw basket tipped a few coins into his open guitar case. An elderly man in a rumpled suit stopped to nod. A group of teenagers flirted with amusement and awe at the earnest veteran belting Elvis's tender melody under the neon haze. For this moment, Bobby was no longer just a busker. He embodied the king's spirit and something more, the raw testimony of a wounded soldier finding refuge in song. Then, as Bobby reached the verse, "Take my hand, take my whole life too," a harsh voice cut through the melody. "Sing something worth a damn," snarled a man leaning from a passing car window, tossing a single coin that clinked angrily in the case. Elvis would have wept hearing that. The crowd wavered. Bobby's right hand faltered on the strings. A tremor ran through him. Doubt, cold and sudden, as if the war had returned to claim him once more. For a heartbeat, he stared at the coin's reflection in the guitar's polished belly, then looked up at his audience, searching for affirmation. In the moment's hush, an elderly woman in a worn floral dress pushed through the crowd. Feather-light shoes scuffed the pavement. She stood before Bobby, silver hair haloing her face. "Son," she said, voice trembling with emotion, "that song, it brought my Jack back to me. He loved that song more than any other. I miss him every day. Thank you for this." She dropped a folded bill heavier than the car's coin and stepped back into the throng. Warmth blossomed in Bobby's chest. He realized he wasn't performing for fame or fortune. He was channeling memory, community, reckoning with past and present. The street had become a sanctuary. His right ear, dulled, fractured, caught the soft intake of breath from listeners moved by the old song's lingering magic. He cleared his throat and rose from the crate, eyes bright with renewed resolve. "Thank you," he said, voice steady. Then, without further ceremony, he launched into the final chorus of "Love Me Tender," each note ringing clear across Beale Street's cacophony. Behind him, the setting sun flickered through the Spanish moss overhead. Bobby Davis, veteran, dreamer, voice of wounded hope, believed, for the first time, that his music might echo beyond the worn bricks and neon lights, reaching the soul of Memphis itself. And somewhere in that golden haze, unseen, unheralded, a figure in a dark cloak watched, one hand slowly raising toward Bobby's melody, as if drawn by the same song that had once saved a young soldier's spirit. As the last notes of "Love Me Tender" drifted into the summer dusk, Bobby let the guitar ring a moment longer before setting it aside. The crowd's murmurs felt warm and encouraging, a gentle tide that buoyed his confidence after the earlier insult. He wiped sweat from his brow and reached for his harmonica when a ripple of surprised laughter cut through the applause. A man in a dark, heavy cloak stepped from the edge of the gathering, hood drawn low over his face. His boots crunched on gravel as he approached the street musician's crate stage. No one recognized him, yet there was something undeniable in his gait. Purpose, quiet authority. Bobby frowned, but, out of respect for the impromptu visitor, offered him the microphone. The newcomer tilted his head toward the metal stand, then raised his gloved hand to silence the curious onlookers. Expectant voices hushed as he leaned in, his breath stirring the wind. When he spoke, it was a raspy whisper carrying straight to Bobby's heart. "Sing with me, if I can dream." Bobby froze, surprise flooding him. That song was more than a ballad. It embodied hope bred in darkness, a plea for unity after the turmoil of the 60s. "Are you sure?" he asked, voice husky. The stranger's nod was resolute. He backed away but kept the mic cable firmly in his hand. The hush grew deeper, as though the street itself held its breath. Bobby lifted the microphone and struck the opening chord on his guitar. The stranger set his hood aside, revealing a familiar profile draped in shadow. Silver hair frowned beneath the brim of a cowboy hat, and fine lines etched around a resolute jaw. His deep blue eyes glinted in the lamp-lit street. Bobby's heart hammered. This was no impostor. Together, they launched into the first verse. "There must be lights, burning brighter somewhere. We must be stronger than hate." The stranger's voice rolled out powerful and unadorned, carrying the plaintive yearning of a man who knew both triumph and loss. Bobby fell into harmony behind him, backing up the legend before him, not as a star-struck fan, but as an equal whose own scars lent weight to every syllable. Around them, time warped. The neon signs on Beale flickered, as if in cadence. Drivers slowed their cars to listen. A lamplighter strolling by paused mid-stride, hand on his long pole. The usually restless crowd stood motionless, entranced by this unlikely duet, a blending of a young veteran's earnest twang and a voice that once defined a generation. A young mother gripping her daughter's hand craned forward, eyes glistening. A construction worker tucked his lunchbox beneath his arm, his rough exterior softened by tears pooling at his lashes. Even the mocking carload from earlier sat in stunned silence through the chorus, faces unguarded. As the chorus swelled, "If I can dream of..." a better land. The stranger's voice soared with conviction enough to uproot despair. Bobby's accompaniment moved from simple rhythm to intricate runs, weaving his own emotion into the melody. He felt the mantle of the war lift from his shoulders, replaced by a shared sense of purpose. When they reached the line, "We must reach out our hand," the stranger turned to Bobby, extending his free hand. Bobby took it, and in their grip was an unspoken communion, the transfer of a legacy, the passing of hope's torch. But as the final notes faded, the stranger slipped the mic back to Bobby and raised his hand in farewell. Without another word, he retreated into the growing night, the hood reclaiming his face, the cloak swallowing his outline. In his place remained only the echo of his voice and a crowd too stunned to move. Silence reigned for a breathless beat, then erupted into thunderous applause, foot-stomps, cheers, whistles. Yet the clamor felt humble compared to the intimacy of what had transpired. Bobby's hands shook as he returned the microphone to its stand. He glanced down the street, where the hooded figure had vanished around the corner, leaving no footprints, no trace. A small girl in the front row tugged her mother's sleeve. "Mom," she whispered, awe in her voice. "That was Elvis, wasn't it?" The mother, tears in her eyes, could only nod. Bobby swallowed against the lump in his throat. He gathered his guitar and took a deliberate bow to the glowing throng. "Thank you," he said, voice thick. "Thank you for believing." As he packed his guitar away, word of the encounter spread through the crowd like wildfire. Street lamp light gleamed off celluloid-gripped phones as neighbors traded stories. "I knew it was him. I heard him at the Sahara. That voice, only Elvis." Yet even as speculation hummed into the summer night, Bobby carried with him the singular truth of the moment. He had sung side by side with a legend who, cloaked in mystery, had chosen this corner of Memphis to remind a weary world that dreams endure, if only we dare to lend them our voice. And underneath the roar of wonder, Bobby felt a tremor of something new, a promise that real magic can emerge when two voices unite under starlit skies, unannounced and unforgettable. Bobby Davis lay awake that night in his rented room above Minnie's cafe, the echoes of the evening still thrumming in his head. He drifted between fitful sleep and waking, haunted by the stranger's voice, Elvis Presley's unmistakable baritone, and the vanishing act that followed, "If I Can Dream." By dawn, Bobby had resolved. He needed proof. Over strong coffee and a plate of scrambled eggs, he reviewed every ember of the night. The small crowd's awe, the hush before the voice emerged, the confidence with which the hooded man took the mic, and the certainty of the bartender who swore Elvis had once slipped him a friendly nod backstage at the Sahara in '67. None of it sufficed for anyone outside the street corner. Bobby locked his guitar case and slipped out into the gray morning light. His first stop was the Orpheum Theater on Beale Street, once glitzy, now faded, where he'd heard Elvis rehearsed unannounced during the '60s. The marquee read, "Closed for maintenance," but the stage door was unlocked. With timid respect, Bobby crept inside the dusty lobby, past velvet ropes, into the high ceiling and chandeliers of the grand hall. He ran a gloved hand across a seat armrest, imagining the king singing for thousands here. A lone security guard, mid-50s and reading a handwritten ledger, looked up. Bobby swallowed. "Sir, I was here last night. I need to ask, did you see Elvis leave in a black Cadillac?" The guard's eyes flicked with amusement, then recognition. He snapped the ledger shut. "Kid," he said quietly, "I worked side by side with him '64 through '68. I saw him slip in and out more times than I can count. If your man wanted invisibility, he got it." Bobby's heart raced. Can you describe the car? The man. The guard leaned close, voice low. Big black Eldorado, tinted windows. And the man? Drove with the same easy confidence he had on stage. Even wore the leather gloves. Don't tell me you didn't notice. Bobby closed his eyes. I did, but nobody else believes me. The guard nodded. Take this. He slid a business card across the counter. Tommy Jackson, private transport, Vegas to Memphis. He drove Presley's VIP rig. Call him. Bobby thanked him and bolted for the door, slipping back into the glare of morning. The card felt heavy in his pocket. Over the next day, Bobby's world shrank to telephone exchanges and hushed conversations. Tommy Jackson answered on the third ring, voice gruff but polite. He confirmed the description. Black Cadillac Eldorado. Gloves, hat. Elvis's signature style. When Bobby asked why Elvis would appear unannounced on a street corner, Tommy hesitated. Elvis liked to get away, you know that. Some nights he'd just roll into town, put on disguise, and disappear into the crowd to feel normal. Did you drive him last night? Bobby pressed. Tommy sighed. I didn't. But I know who did. A kid named Mullins. Works garages in Whitehaven. He's got a beat-up Chevy. Saw him pick up a boss in the Cadillac. Armed with yet another lead, Bobby set out for Whitehaven, a township beyond the city's heartbeat. He navigated winding back roads until he found Mullins's small, unlit garage. Ramshackle, the sign faded to a ghost. Inside, sparking wrenches and rags stained with oil. Bobby knocked on the open door. Moments later, a gaunt young man in coveralls peeked out, grease smudged across his forehead. You're Bobby Davis, he said, voice cautious. He told me you'd come. You know why I'm here? Bobby asked, stepping into the dim interior. Mullins nodded. Yeah, he wanted to remind you, and the world, that dreams need tending. He said he'd meet you last night if you sang for him. He met me, Bobby whispered. I sang. He sang Mullins circled a workbench, pouring coffee from a dented thermos. When he got back in the Cadillac, he slipped me this. He produced a crumpled note. Bobby's eyes widened. Keep the dream alive, E.P. The identical handwriting he'd found in his guitar case after the performance. Bobby held the paper as if it were sacred. Tell Bobby that no dream is impossible if he believes. Mullins sipped his coffee. He said, don't let Nashville or Hollywood choke out the soul of Memphis. He said your voice mattered. And if you get the chance, go to Graceland. Elvis's words echoed in Bobby's mind. Go to Graceland. He folded the note into his shirt pocket and held his gaze. Where did he go? He asked. Mullins shrugged. I drove off after him. He was gone like smoke. Bobby leaned against the workbench, the cracked linoleum cool beneath his boots. He realized he'd spent his life chasing someone else's stardust when he should have tended his own flame. His guitar, now resting at home, felt heavier with expectation. He climbed into his Chevy and headed back to Memphis proper, the sun low in the sky, ready to set. The air held a promise of revelation. Either he'd stumble onto a hidden truth at Graceland, or he'd find that the real journey lay in believing himself worthy of the dream he had chased so long. By twilight, he stood before the gates of Graceland, pathlit and silent, heart pounding with hope and uncertainty. The looming mansion, drenched in orange dusk, seemed to pulse with unspoken history. In his pocket, the folded ticket awaited. When you are ready, come home. Elvis's call to come home was no longer a distant echo. Bobby Davis lifted the ticket, breathed deep the humid air, and stepped forward, toward the threshold of a dream that had become his own. The iron gates of Graceland loomed before Bobby Davis like sentinels to another realm. Under the lavender-washed sky, The mansion's white stucco facade glowed with a timeless hush. Bobby's heart pounded as he clutched the folded ticket in his hand. "When you are ready, come home." With a steadying breath, he stepped forward, pressing the brass button on the intercom. A crackle sounded, then a measured voice. "Mr. Davis, welcome. Please drive in." Bobby obeyed, tires crunching on the gravel path that curved past magnolia trees, heavy with bloom. He parked beside a sleek black Cadillac and climbed out, guitar case slung over his shoulder. A uniformed gate attendant nodded respectfully and disappeared back into the shadows. He followed the carriage path toward the front door, an entrance reserved for legends and pilgrims. The marble impression beneath his boots felt solid, yet his mind teetered between disbelief and wonder. The hush inside was profound, as if the house itself waited in anticipation. A butler appeared from a side hall, impeccably dressed, hands clasped. "Mr. Presley will see you momentarily, Mr. Davis. Please enter the music room." Through ornate double doors, Bobby entered the heart of the home. Walls lined with platinum records, portraits of a young Elvis in Sun Records days, and a grand Steinway piano positioned under a crystal chandelier. The air smelled of polished wood and faint sandalwood, an aroma that felt both regal and intimate. Bobby set down his guitar case and watched as the butler slipped away. Silence pressed in, soft and expectant. His pulse throbbed against his temples. He unpacked his guitar, loosening the latches with trembling fingers, as though each click might summon destiny. A door at the far end opened. Elvis Presley emerged, clad in a simple white shirt and dark slacks. No sequins, no stage costume, only the stripped-down elegance of a man returning to his roots. His hair was slightly longer than Bobby had imagined, peppered with silver, yet his posture remained relaxed, almost boyish. "Bobby," Elvis said quietly, extending his hand with a warmth that defied star power. "Glad you made it." Bobby swallowed. "Thank you, sir," he stammered, voice raw. He clasped Elvis's hand, feeling the grip of someone accustomed to command and compassion in equal measure. "Please, call me Elvis," the singer replied, nodding toward a stool and a second guitar resting on a stand. "I thought we could play something together. For real." Bobby's eyes widened. He nodded and took the offered guitar, heart racing. "I'd be honored." They sat side by side before the Steinway, guitars in hand. Elvis tuned his low E chord, then looked over at Bobby. "You ready?" "Yes," Bobby whispered, strumming a tentative C chord. Elvis smiled, fond and encouraging. He began to arpeggiate the familiar notes of "Can't Help Falling in Love." Bobby joined in harmony, their voices weaving a tapestry of reverence and authenticity. The chords resonated in the high-ceilinged room, echoing off walls that had known both glitz and grief. Halfway through, Elvis set down his guitar and walked to the piano bench. Bobby followed, curiosity flickering in his chest. Elvis's fingers danced across ivory, introducing a gentle gospel flourish. Then he patted the bench. "Join me." Bobby moved to sit beside him, placing his guitar aside. Together, they played a tender duet, bottled lightning in wood and wire, as soul-stirring as a Sunday sermon. Elvis's voice rose, true and unguarded, blessed with the same raw vulnerability Bobby had witnessed in the hidden street corner. Bobby's voice offered a steady counterpoint, a tribute to survival and song. When the last chord faded, they sat in silence, chest heaving, tears pooling in their eyes. The music lingered like a prayer, binding the veteran street performer and the king in a moment beyond words. Elvis turned to him, eyes bright. "You did good, Bobby. You kept the dream alive." Bobby pressed his palms to his eyes, overwhelmed. You did more than that, Elvis. You reminded me why I play. Elvis rose and embraced him in a firm, brotherly hug, the kind that bore shared scars and common purpose. Now you're part of it, he said, part of the story I carry. They stepped back into the music room, where the grand piano waited in quiet majesty. Elvis gestured toward a stack of photos on a nearby table, black and whites of his early days in Tupelo. He picked one, a nurse cradling an infant, the baby's eyes peeking into the world with fierce curiosity. "That's Gladys and me," Elvis said softly. "She saved my life. I saved a dream tonight on a Memphis corner. Now you'll help carry that same spirit forward." Elvis reached into his jacket pocket and retrieved a small, worn notebook. Inside, on the first page, was written in bold script, "For Bobby Davis. May your music always light the way." E.P. Bobby felt his breath catch. Elvis placed the notebook in his hands. "Keep it," he said. "Write your songs in here." As the late afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows, they stood together in companionable silence. Outside, the slow clatter of a distant train blended with the hush of Graceland's hallowed halls. Bobby Davis, once a lone busker on a Memphis corner, now held in his arms the keys to a legacy, proof that sometimes dreams born in shadowed streets find their greatest fulfillment in the heart of home. And in that quiet conclusion, no crowds, no cameras, only two musicians bound by gratitude, the dream was made real once more.